The stars had never seemed so cold to Admiral Kexthal as he stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Victory. Behind him, 300 warships of the Zephyrian Collective stretched across space like a metal storm cloud. Each ship carried enough firepower to turn a planet into dust. The Admiral's four arms moved across the control panels with practiced ease as he reviewed the data about their newest target. "Another primitive world, Supreme Commander," his aide, Subleader Thexmo, reported with a dismissive click of his mandibles. "They call themselves humans, single planet origin. Limited space presence. Their largest vessels are barely the size of our patrol craft." Kexthal's compound eyes studied the holographic display showing the human solar system. It looked no different from the 17 other systems they had conquered in the past 5 cycles. The species always followed the same pattern. First came fear, then desperate attempts at negotiation, and finally submission when they realized the futility of resistance. "Have they responded to our standard conquest protocol?" the Admiral asked. "Yes, Supreme Commander." A single ship representative acknowledged our transmission. They requested 72 of their time units to provide an official response. Kexthal's thorax vibrated with what other species might mistake for laughter. 72 hours. Such a pitiful delay. Most species begged for weeks or months to prepare their surrender. These humans seemed almost eager to get their defeat over with. "Very well, monitor their communications. Alert me when they transmit their capitulation." On the bridge of the used Denver, Captain Ryan Brooks stood perfectly still as he read the alien message for the 5th time. The translation software had worked flawlessly, leaving no doubt about the meaning. The message was simple and brutal: surrender everything or die. "Captain," Communications Officer Lieutenant Danny Walsh called from his station. "Earth Command is requesting immediate conference. Priority Alpha." Ryan nodded and activated the quantum communicator. The face of President Helen Martinez appeared. On the main screen, her expression grim but determined. Around her, Ryan could see the members of the Global Defense Council gathering for an emergency session. "Captain Brooks," the President began, "I assume you've reviewed the alien transmission." "Yes, ma'am." "They're giving us 72 hours to surrender all human territories and submit to their rule." General Patricia Hayes leaned into view, her gray hair pulled back in a military bun that had not moved in 20 years. "What's your assessment of their capabilities, Captain?" Ryan pulled up the sensor data his ship had collected during the brief encounter. 300 vessels, ma'am. Each one significantly larger than our biggest battleships. Energy signatures suggest advanced weapon systems and defensive capabilities far beyond our current technology. Ambassador Lucas Reed, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should consider opening diplomatic channels. There might be room for negotiation, some form of peaceful coexistence." "With respect, Ambassador," General Hayes replied, "you don't negotiate with someone holding a gun to your head. These aliens have conquered 17 other star systems. There's no indication they're interested in anything except complete domination." "President." Martinez raised her hand for silence. "Captain Brooks, in your professional opinion, what are our chances in a direct military confrontation?" Ryan considered his words carefully. The honest answer was that humanity had no chance at all. The alien fleet could probably destroy every human vessel and orbital installation within days. But something in the alien message bothered him. It was too confident, too dismissive. They treated humanity like a minor inconvenience rather than a potential threat. "Ma'am, based on pure numbers and technology, we're outmatched. But there's something about their approach that suggests they've never encountered serious resistance. They expect us to fold immediately, and will we?" The President asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. Ryan thought about his daughter Sarah, safe in the colonies. He thought about the millions of humans spread across dozens of worlds, building lives and families among the stars. He thought about the alien message, so casual in its demand for total surrender. "No, ma'am," he said finally. "I don't think we will." General Hayes smiled grimly. "Then we'd better start preparing for war." The next 72 hours passed like a fever dream across human space. On Earth, factory workers like Tony Martinez found themselves retooling production lines to manufacture ammunition instead of consumer goods. In the orbital shipyards above Mars, engineer Kate Sullivan worked without sleep to retrofit civilian vessels with whatever weapons could be mounted on their hulls. Dr. Ben Parker, a xenobiologist at the Lunar Research Station, analyzed every piece of data about the aliens that Captain Brooks had managed to collect. The information was limited, but he began developing theories about their physiology and potential weaknesses. On military bases throughout the solar system, soldiers trained for scenarios they had only imagined in their worst nightmares. Colonel Steve Thompson ran endless drills with his ground forces, knowing that if the aliens reached the surface of any human world, the war would already be lost. But it was the reaction of ordinary citizens that surprised even the government leaders. Instead of panic, there was determination. Instead of fleeing, people volunteered for anything that might help the war effort. Children too young to fight donated their savings to buy materials for weapons. Elderly veterans shared tactical knowledge. With active military personnel. Captain Amy Foster, commanding a freight convoy near the Jupiter colonies, watched as her civilian crews began modifying their cargo haulers into improvised warships. Nobody had ordered them to do it. Nobody had even suggested it. They simply saw what needed to be done and did it. As the deadline approached, Admiral Kexthal prepared to receive the human surrender. He had already selected the tribute worlds, where the most useful humans would be relocated as workers. The rest would be processed according to standard collective protocols. Supreme Commander, Subleader Thexmal announced, "We are receiving a transmission from the human representative." Excellent. Display it on the main screen. Captain Ryan Brooks appeared on the view screen, standing on the bridge of his ship. He wore his dress uniform, every button polished, every ribbon properly placed. Behind him, his crew stood at attention. "I am Captain Ryan Brooks of the United Earthship Denver, speaking for all of humanity," he began. His voice was calm, professional, and utterly without fear. "We have received your message and considered your demands." Kexthal leaned forward in his command throne, anticipating the familiar words of surrender. Every species eventually spoke them. It was simply a matter of accepting reality. "Our response is simple," Captain Brooks continued. "No." The single word hung in space between the two fleets like a challenge thrown down in an ancient arena. Sub-Leader Thexmal's mandibles clicked in confusion. Several other bridge officers turned to look at their admiral, uncertain they had heard correctly. "No," Kexthal repeated. "That is correct. We reject your demands. We will not surrender our territories. We will not submit to your rule. If you want human space, you'll have to take it from us." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Endless Victory in stunned silence. In all his campaigns across 17 star systems, Admiral Kexthal had never encountered such a response. The smaller, weaker species always recognized the inevitability of their defeat. They understood that resistance was futile. These humans either didn't understand or they didn't care. "Supreme Commander," his tactical officer reported, "our sensors are detecting increased activity throughout their system. Multiple ships are moving into defensive positions." Kexthal studied the tactical display. The humans were actually preparing to fight, not preparing to delay the inevitable, not staging a token resistance for honor's sake. They were genuinely preparing to fight against impossible odds. "How fascinating," he murmured. "They truly believe they can resist us." His thorax vibrated again, but this time with genuine amusement rather than dismissive humor. Perhaps these humans would provide more entertainment than usual before their inevitable defeat. "Signal the fleet," he commanded. "All ships advance to attack formation. Let us teach these humans the price of defying the Zephyrian Collective." As the alien armada began its approach toward the inner solar system, Captain Brooks watched from his position near Earth's moon. The odds were impossible. The enemy was overwhelming. Any rational analysis suggested that humanity was about to be wiped from existence, But Ryan Brooks had grown up reading stories of impossible victories. He had studied military history filled with smaller forces defeating larger ones through determination, ingenuity, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to give up. "All stations, this is Captain Brooks," he broadcast to the human fleet. "Remember, we're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting for the right to exist as free people. Make them pay for every inch." The war for humanity's survival was about to begin. The Zephyrian fleet moved through space like a deadly parade. Admiral Kexthal stood on his bridge, watching the tactical display as his ships approached the outer edge of the human solar system. Jupiter loomed ahead, its massive bulk surrounded by dozens of moons and orbital installations. "Supreme Commander," his sensor operator reported, "we are detecting anomalous readings throughout the target system." Kexthal's forearms moved across his command console, bringing up detailed scans. What he saw made his compound eyes narrow with interest. The space around Jupiter was not empty as their initial reconnaissance had suggested. Hundreds of small objects drifted between the moons, too regular in their placement to be natural debris. "Mines," he concluded with something approaching respect. "The humans have seeded their outer system with explosive devices." Subleader Thexmal clicked his mandibles in dismissive amusement. "Primitive contact explosives, Supreme Commander. Our shields will absorb such crude attacks without difficulty." "Perhaps," Kexel murmured, but something in the human placement pattern suggested more sophistication than his aide assumed. On the bridge of the UES Titan, Commander Jake Morrison watched the alien fleet approach through his tactical display. His ship, along with 37 other human vessels, waited in the shadow of Ganymede. The modified interceptors looked nothing like the sleek alien craft bearing down on them. They were angular, utilitarian, built for function rather than beauty. "All units, this is Morrison," he broadcast on the encrypted channel. "Remember the plan, hit and run. Make them chase us through the minefield. Do not engage in direct combat unless absolutely necessary." Lieutenant Lisa Carter, piloting the Interceptor Wasp, checked her weapon systems one final time. Instead of the energy weapons most spacefaring species preferred, her ship carried a belly full of kinetic rounds, simple metal slugs designed to be fired at tremendous velocity. The human engineers had discovered something interesting about energy shields during their hasty preparation for war. "Contacts incoming," her sensor operator called. 24 alien vessels approaching at attack speed. The first Zephyrian patrol group entered the Jupiter system with confidence. Their energy shields glowed with protective force, their weapon systems charged and ready. They had done this same maneuver hundreds of times in 17 different star systems. The smaller defending ships would fire a few desperate shots, realize the futility of their position, and either flee or be destroyed. What happened next violated every expectation Admiral Kexthal had developed over decades of conquest. The human ships did not flee. They accelerated directly toward the Zephyrian patrol, closing distance at suicidal speed. When they opened fire, it was not with energy weapons that would splash harmlessly against superior shields. Instead, streams of metal projectiles erupted from their weapons, traveling at velocities that made them nearly impossible to track. The kinetic rounds punched through the alien energy shields as if they were paper. The Zephyrians had designed their defenses to absorb and dissipate energy attacks. They had never encountered a species primitive enough to use simple ballistic weapons in space combat. "Impossible," Subleader Thexmal whispered as he watched 3 of their patrol ships take critical damage in the first exchange, but the surprises were just beginning. As the damaged Zephyrian vessels tried to regroup, the hidden mines activated. These were not the simple contact explosives the aliens had expected. Each mine was a sophisticated device that waited for specific sensor signatures before detonating. When they exploded, they did so in carefully timed sequences that created overlapping fields of destruction. Commander Morrison led his squadron through the chaos with maneuvers that seemed to defy tactical logic. Where alien commanders expected orderly formations and predictable strategies, the humans flew like a pack of wild animals. They broke formation. without warning, regrouped in impossible configurations, and attacked from angles that no military academy would have taught. Lieutenant Carter found herself in a one-on-one engagement with a Zephyrian heavy cruiser. The alien ship was 3 times the size of her interceptor and carried enough firepower to level a city. By every measure of military logic, she should have been dead within seconds. Instead, she did something the alien commander could not have anticipated. She flew directly toward the cruiser's main weapon array, using her ship's superior maneuverability to stay within the large vessel's blind spots. As the cruiser tried to track her with its main guns, she peppered its hull with kinetic rounds, targeting what her tactical computer identified as sensor clusters and weapon hardpoints. The alien captain, trained in formal space combat doctrine, found himself unable to respond effectively to such unconventional tactics. His ship's automated systems kept trying to lock onto the small human vessel with weapons designed for long-range engagement, while the human pilot danced around his hull like an angry wasp. All units, concentrate fire on the small craft, the Zephyrian commander ordered, but his remaining ships were dealing with their own problems. The human squadron had scattered throughout the battlefield, each pilot conducting their own private war against ships 10 times their size. Admiral Kexfel watched the battle unfold with growing amazement. His patrol group, which should have swept the humans aside without effort, was being systematically dismantled by inferior ships using primitive weapons. The humans fought with a combination of reckless courage and tactical unpredictability that his forces were simply not prepared to counter. "Supreme Commander," his tactical officer reported with barely concealed panic, "we have lost 6 ships. The remaining patrol units are requesting permission to withdraw and regroup." "Denied," Kexthal replied coldly. "Order the second wave to advance. I want to see more of how these humans fight." The second wave of Zephyrian ships entered the battle zone expecting to find the remnants of human resistance. Instead, they flew into a carefully prepared trap. The surviving human interceptors had used the chaos of the first engagement to reposition themselves among the asteroids and debris of the outer system. Commander Morrison had learned something important during the first exchange. The aliens were excellent at coordinated fleet actions, but they struggled when forced to fight individual engagements. Their tactics relied on overwhelming firepower and superior technology, not on adaptability or creative thinking. "All units, implement Wolfpack protocol," he ordered. The human ships began hunting in small groups, using the debris field for cover as they stalked the larger alien vessels. They would emerge from hiding, deliver devastating attacks with their kinetic weapons, then disappear back into the maze of asteroids before the aliens could respond effectively. Lieutenant Carter, her interceptor now scarred from multiple near misses, found herself partnered with 2 other pilots for an attack on a Zephyrian destroyer. The alien ship was systematically hunting through the asteroid field, its powerful senses trying to locate the hidden human vessels. "This is Wesp," Carter transmitted. "I'm going to get his attention. When he turns to chase me, hit him from behind." Before her wingman could object, Carter accelerated her interceptor out of the asteroid field and directly toward the destroyer. She opened fire with everything she had, her kinetic rounds sparking against the alien ship's hull. The destroyer immediately turned to pursue her, its massive engines glowing as it gave chase. That was exactly what Carter had hoped for. As the destroyer exposed its rear quarter, her 2 wingmen emerged from concealment and opened fire on the alien ship's engine nacelles. The concentrated kinetic bombardment overloaded the destroyer's power systems, leaving it drifting helplessly in space. Throughout the outer system, similar small engagements were taking place. Human pilots, outnumbered and outgunned, were using their superior knowledge of the local environment and their willingness to take extreme risks to level the playing field, but the cost was mounting. Commander Morrison watched as 3 more human interceptors were destroyed, their pilots buying precious seconds for their squadmates to escape. Each loss meant the sacrifice of trained personnel that humanity could not afford to lose. "All units, begin withdrawal to secondary positions," Morrison ordered reluctantly. "We've made our point." As the surviving human ships retreated deeper into the solar system, Admiral Kexthal surveyed the battlefield. He had lost 11 ships in an engagement that should have been a simple patrol action. The humans had demonstrated capabilities that contradicted every assumption his intelligence services had made about primitive species. "Supreme Commander," Subleader Thexmal said quietly, "perhaps we should request additional forces from the homeworld." Kexthal considered this suggestion. In all his campaigns, he had never needed to call for reinforcements. The Zephyrian Collective's standard fleet deployment had always been sufficient to crush any resistance. No, he decided finally. These humans are clever, but they are still vastly outnumbered. We will adapt our tactics and proceed with the invasion. But as he gave orders for the fleet to advance toward the inner planets, Admiral Kexthal found himself thinking about the human pilots who had just outfought his best commanders. They had shown a combination of skill, courage, and tactical creativity that he had never encountered before. For the first time in his long military career, the news of the battle at Jupiter spread across human space like wildfire. On Earth, President Helen Martinez stood before the Global Defense Council with reports streaming in from every human colony and outpost. What she saw amazed her more than the military victory itself. "Show me the production reports again," she requested. General Patricia Hayes activated the holographic display. Numbers and charts filled the air, showing manufacturing output from across human space. In the 72 hours since the alien ultimatum, industrial production had increased by 300%. Civilian factories were working around the clock, converting their assembly lines to produce military equipment. Tony Martinez and his team at the Detroit manufacturing complex have retooled 6 production lines, the general reported. They're now producing kinetic ammunition instead of ground vehicles. Similar conversions are happening on Mars, Luna, and 12 other major industrial centers. On Mars, Tony Martinez wiped sweat from his forehead as he supervised the installation of new machinery. His factory had once built civilian transports for the colony shipping lanes. Now the same assembly line was producing armor-piercing rounds for the fleet's kinetic weapons. "How many rounds can we produce per day?" asked his supervisor, Betty Cooper, as she reviewed the production schedules. "With 3 shifts running continuously, we can make 50,000 rounds daily," Tony replied. "But we need more raw materials. The aluminum and steel reserves won't last another week at this pace." Betty nodded grimly. "I've already put in requests to the mining operations. They're working overtime too." In the asteroid belt, mining crews that had spent years extracting precious metals for civilian use now focused on gathering materials for the war effort. Captain Amy Foster, commanding a freight convoy, coordinated the movement of raw materials from the mining stations to the manufacturing centers. "This is convoy leader Foster to all units," she broadcast to her fleet of cargo. "Haulers, we've got priority shipments for Mars, Luna, and Earth. Double shifts for everyone until further notice." Her cargo ships had been modified during the journey, fitted with whatever weapons the crews could install. Mining lasers were converted to point defense systems. Cargo containers were replaced with armor plating. The civilian vessels looked like a patchwork fleet, but they were ready to fight if necessary. Meanwhile, at the Luna Research Station, Dr. Ben Parker worked without sleep, analyzing the data collected from the Jupiter battle. His laboratory was filled with salvaged pieces of alien technology retrieved from the wreckage of destroyed Zephyrian ships. "Fascinating," he muttered as he examined an alien communication device under his microscope. "Their entire system operates on subsonic frequencies." His assistant, Dr. Linda Walsh, looked up from her own workstation. "What does that mean for us?" "It means they communicate through sound waves below human hearing range," Parker explained. "If we can disrupt those frequencies, we might be able to interfere with their coordination." Parker began designing a new type of weapon based on his discovery. If the aliens relied on subsonic communication, then focused sound waves at the right frequency might disorient them, or even disrupt their ship systems. On military bases throughout the solar system, Soldiers trained for scenarios they had never imagined. Colonel Steve Thompson ran endless drills with his ground forces at the Mars Defense Academy. His troops practiced urban combat, knowing that if the aliens reached the surface of any human world, the war would become very personal. "Remember," Thompson shouted to his soldiers as they practiced clearing buildings, "the aliens are larger and stronger than humans, but they're not used to fighting on our terms. Use the environment, use your speed. Make them fight our kind of war." Private Sam Davis, barely 19 years old, adjusted his grip on his kinetic rifle. The weapon felt solid in his hands, reliable in a way that energy weapons never seemed to be. "Colonel, what if they have personal shields like their ships?" "Then we get close enough that shields don't matter," Thompson replied. "Urban combat is about close quarters and quick thinking. Those are human advantages." Engineer Kate Sullivan had not left her workstation in the orbital shipyards above Mars for 3 days. Her team was converting civilian vessels into warships as fast as they could modify the designs. The work was dangerous and exhausting, but nobody complained. "We need to mount these kinetic cannons on the cargo hauler," she explained to her crew, as they worked on another conversion. "The ship wasn't designed for this kind of stress, so we'll have to reinforce the entire frame." Her assistant, Mike Torres, looked at the engineering specifications with concern. "Kate, this is going to reduce the ship's speed by 40%, and the power requirements ... will drain the main batteries in 6 hours of continuous fire," Kate finished. "But 6 hours might be enough to make a difference." The converted civilian vessels would never match proper military ships, but they would add numbers to the human fleet. Every cargo hauler that could mount a weapon was another target the aliens would have to deal with. Back on Earth, children too young to fight found their own ways to contribute. Schools were converted into collection centers for materials that could be recycled into military equipment. Elderly veterans shared their knowledge with active military personnel, teaching lessons learned from conflicts that had ended decades ago. In New York, retired General Bob Mitchell addressed a group of current military officers. His hair was white and his hands shook slightly, but his mind was sharp as ever. "I fought in 3 different wars," he told them. "What I learned is that the enemy always has advantages you don't expect. But they also have weaknesses they don't know about. Find those weaknesses and exploit them ruthlessly." The unity of purpose across human space was unprecedented. People who had spent years arguing about politics and trade disputes now worked together with single-minded determination. The alien threat had accomplished something no human leader ever could. It had united the entire species against a common enemy. Admiral Kexthal studied the intelligence reports from his forward scouts with growing unease. The humans were not behaving like any species the Zephyrian Collective had encountered before. Instead of panic and desperate attempts at negotiation, they were preparing for total war. "Supreme Commander," Sub-Leader Thexmo reported, "our reconnaissance indicates massive increases in military production throughout their system. They are converting civilian infrastructure to support their war effort." "Show me the analysis," Kexthal ordered. The tactical display showed human space as a network of interconnected industrial and military installations. What had seemed like a primitive civilization was revealing itself to be a sophisticated war machine that could rapidly adapt to threats. "They are mobilizing their entire society," the Admiral observed with something approaching admiration. "This level of coordination suggests either an extremely efficient government or what, Supreme Commander? Or a species that instinctively understands total warfare." The implications of this realization troubled Kexthal more than he cared to admit. The Zephyrian Collective conquered other species by demonstrating overwhelming superiority and then accepting their surrender. But what if the humans refused to surrender, no matter how impossible their situation became? On Mars, Captain Ryan? Brooks met with the planetary defense commanders to plan their strategy for the next phase of the war. The Red Planet had become the key to human resistance. Its orbital shipyards, manufacturing centers, and military bases made it the most important target after Earth itself. "The aliens will come here next," Brooks explained to the assembled officers. Mars is too important for them to bypass. We need to make them pay heavily for every inch of ground they try to take. Commander Jake Morrison, recently promoted after his success at Jupiter, studied the tactical displays. Our interceptors can harass their fleet, but we can't stop a determined assault. We need something bigger. Engineer Kate Sullivan cleared her throat. What if we don't try to stop them? What if we make them come to us? She activated her own display, showing the orbital space around Mars. We've been thinking defensively, trying to keep them away from the planet. But what if we let them get close and then hit them when they're committed to the attack? The plan that emerged from the meeting was audacious and dangerous. Instead of fighting the aliens in open space, they would draw them into the complex orbital environment around Mars, where the planet's gravity, its moons, and its extensive infrastructure could be used as weapons. Dr. Ben Parker's sonic weapon. Prototypes were rushed into production. The devices were crude and untested, but they might disrupt alien communications at a critical moment. Every advantage, no matter how small, could make the difference between victory and defeat. As the Zephyrian fleet continued its advance toward Mars, both sides prepared for a battle that would determine the future of human independence. The aliens brought superior technology in overwhelming numbers. The humans brought desperation, ingenuity, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. In the factories and shipyards of Mars, the sounds of constant production echoed day and night. Hammers rang against metal, machines hummed with continuous operation, and the voices of humans working together toward a common goal filled the air. Tony Martinez looked up. Admiral Kexthal stood on the bridge of the Endless Victory, watching Mars grow larger on the main display. The red planet hung in space like a bloody warning, surrounded by the orbital infrastructure that made it the second most important world in human space. His fleet had swollen to over 400 ships with the arrival of reinforcements from the Zephyrian homeworld. Supreme Commander, his communications officer announced, we are receiving a priority transmission from the High Command. The image of war leader Vexener appeared on the screen. Vexener was larger than most Zephyrians, his carapace bearing the scars of a dozen successful campaigns. His 4 eyes glowed with the cold light of absolute certainty. Admiral Kexthal. Vexener's voice carried the authority of the collective's highest military ranks. The High Command is concerned about the delays in this campaign. You have been engaged with these humans for longer than any previous conquest. Kexthal felt his thorax tighten with controlled anger. War leader, the humans are proving more resourceful than our initial assessments suggested. They fight with tactics we have not encountered before. Tactics, Vexener repeated dismissively. No amount of clever maneuvering can overcome the fundamental reality of superior numbers and technology. I am assuming direct command of this operation. The transmission ended, leaving Kexthal staring at the blank screen. In all his years of service, he had never been relieved of command during an active campaign. The humiliation burned in his chest. But beneath the shame was something else. Concern for what Vexener's aggressive approach might cost the collective on Mars. The final preparations for battle were reaching completion. In the orbital shipyards, engineer Kate Sullivan watched as the last of the converted civilian vessels moved into position. The sight was both inspiring and heartbreaking, cargo haulers and passenger transports that had never been designed for war, now bristling with improvised weapons and armor. Kate, her assistant Mike Torres called from across the dock, we've got a problem with the sonic weapon installations. She hurried over to examine the new devices that Dr. Ben Parker had rushed into production. The sonic disruptors were mounted on several ships designed to interfere with alien communications during the coming battle. What's wrong with them? Kate asked. Power consumption is higher than we calculated, Mike replied, showing her the energy readings. If we fire these things at full power, they'll drain the ship's batteries in minutes. Kate studied the specifications, her mind racing through possible solutions. What if we don't fire them continuously? Short bursts, timed to disrupt their coordination at critical moments? That might work, Mike agreed. But we'll only get a few shots before the power runs out. Then we'd better make those shots count. In the Mars Defense Command Center, Captain Ryan Brooks coordinated with military leaders across the solar system. The holographic display showed the positions of every human vessel, from the largest battleships to the smallest converted cargo haulers. It was an impressive sight, but Brooks knew the numbers were still heavily against them. "Captain, General." Patricia Hayes's voice came through the communication system from Earth. "What's the status of our defensive preparations?" "All available ships are in position around Mars," Brooks reported. "We've got the orbital platforms armed and ready, and Colonel Thompson's ground forces are prepared for possible surface assault. And the sonic weapons? Untested but operational. Dr. Parker thinks they'll disrupt alien communications, but we won't know for sure until we use them in combat." General Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Ryan, I want you to know that whatever happens at Mars, Earth is proud of what you've accomplished. You've given humanity a fighting chance." Brooks nodded, though she couldn't see him. "We'll make it count, General." The Zephyrian fleet entered the Mars system in perfect formation, their ships arranged in the precise patterns that had brought victory across 17 star systems. War leader Vexener commanded from his flagship, the inevitable Conquest, confident that overwhelming force would finally crush human resistance. "All vessels, advance to attack formation," Vexener ordered. "Target their orbital installations first, then their ships. Leave their planet intact. We will need the infrastructure." But as the alien fleet approached Mars, they discovered that the humans had prepared a surprise. The space around the red planet was not empty. Hidden among the asteroids and debris of the system were dozens of human vessels waiting in ambush. Commander Jake Morrison led the first wave of interceptors out of concealment. His ships had been hiding in the shadow of Phobos, Mars's larger moon, using the rocky satellite to mask their heat signatures from alien sensors. "All units, this is Morrison," he broadcast. "Execute hammer strike." The human ships emerged from hiding simultaneously, attacking the alien formation from multiple directions. But this time they were not alone. The converted civilian vessels that Kate Sullivan's teams had modified joined the assault, their improvised weapons adding to the chaos. Captain Amy Foster piloted her converted cargo hauler, the New Hope, directly toward a Zephyrian cruiser. Her ship was slow and clumsy compared to the military vessels, but it carried something the aliens had not expected, a mining charge powerful enough to crack asteroids. "This is for everyone back home," she whispered as she set her ship on a collision course with the alien vessel. The Zephyrian cruiser tried to destroy the approaching cargo ship, but Foster's crew had welded armor plating over all critical systems. The mining charge detonated against the cruiser's hull, tearing a massive hole in the alien ship's side. Throughout the battle zone, similar desperate attacks were taking place. Human crews who had never trained for military combat threw their ships against the alien fleet with reckless courage. The psychological impact on the Zephyrians was enormous. They had never faced an enemy willing to sacrifice so much for victory. War leader Vexener watched the battle unfold with growing confusion. The humans were using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They attacked without regard for their own survival, used civilian vessels as weapons, and showed no interest in preserving their forces for future battles. "Why do they fight this way?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Do they not understand that such losses are unsustainable?" War leader, our intelligence suggests that humans form emotional attachments to their territory and their species that exceed normal survival instincts, the officer replied. They appear to view death in battle as preferable to submission. This concept was alien to Zephyrian thinking. The collective valued efficiency and survival above all else. They conquered other species not out of hatred, but as a practical matter of resource acquisition. The idea of fighting to the death for abstract concepts like freedom was beyond their comprehension. Dr. Ben Parker's sonic weapons chose that moment to make their debut. Lieutenant Lisa Carter, now commanding a modified destroyer, activated the experimental devices during a close engagement with 3 alien ships. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The subsonic pulses disrupted the aliens' communication systems, causing their coordinated attack to fall apart. Two of the Zephyrian vessels collided as their pilots lost contact with their formation leaders. "It works," Carter broadcast excitedly. "The sonic disruptors are scrambling their communications." But the victory came at a cost. The power drain from the sonic weapons left Carter's ship vulnerable, and a fourth alien vessel moved in for the kill. As enemy fire began to tear through her ship's hull, Carter made a decision that would echo throughout the battle. Instead of trying to escape, she turned her crippled destroyer toward the largest enemy ship she could see and activated every weapon system her vessel possessed. The combined firepower, including the last charge of her sonic disruptors, overwhelmed the alien vessel's defenses. Both ships were destroyed in the resulting explosion, but Carter's sacrifice had eliminated one of the enemy's most powerful vessels. Similar acts of heroism were taking place throughout the battle. Tony Martinez, who had left his factory to serve as a gunner on one of the orbital defense platforms, stayed at his post even as alien fire began to tear the station apart. His final transmission was heard across the human fleet: "Keep fighting. Make them pay for every inch." The battle raged for 6 hours, longer than any previous engagement between humans and aliens. When the surviving Zephyrian vessels finally withdrew, they left behind the wreckage of 43 ships. The human losses were equally severe. Over half their fleet had been destroyed or damaged beyond repair, but Mars remained in human hands. War leader Vexenor stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. His overwhelming force had been fought to a standstill by an inferior enemy using primitive weapons and suicidal tactics. The humans had lost more ships than they could afford, but they had proven something that shook the foundations of Zephyrian military doctrine. "War leader," his aide reported quietly, "the High Command is requesting a status report." Vexenor considered his response carefully. How could he explain to the collective's leadership that their invincible fleet had been stopped by a species that seemed to value abstract ideals more than their own lives? "Tell them," he said finally, "that we require additional reinforcements, and suggest that they reconsider the strategic value of conquering this system." War leader Vexenor stood in the communications chamber of his flagship, facing the assembled leadership of the Zephyrian collective. The holographic images of the High Council members surrounded him, their compound eyes glowing with cold fury. Never before had a collective campaign required such extensive reinforcements. "Explain to us, War Leader," spoke High Counselor Zethkaz, her voice carrying the authority of ages, "how a primitive species has managed to resist our forces for this long." Vexenor's mandibles clicked nervously. "Honored counselors, the humans possess certain characteristics that our previous intelligence failed to identify. They fight with a disregard for personal survival that defies rational analysis." "You are telling us," another counselor interjected, "that our mighty collective has been stalled by irrationality?" "Not irrationality, honored ones, something else. They fight as if the survival of every individual human depends on their personal resistance. They convert their entire civilization to warfare within days. They sacrifice themselves not for tactical advantage, but for abstract concepts we do not fully understand." The silence that followed was more frightening than any rebuke. Finally, High Counselor Zethkaz spoke again. "You will proceed with the final assault on their homeworld. Use whatever force is necessary. This embarrassment to the collective must end." The transmission ended, leaving Vexenor alone with his doubts. In 3 days, his expanded fleet of over 600 ships would arrive at Earth. It would be the largest military force the collective had ever assembled for a single campaign on Earth. President Helen Martinez stood before the Global Defense Council for what everyone knew might be their final meeting as free leaders. The reports from Mars had been sobering. Humanity had proven they could fight, but the cost was devastating. Half their fleet was gone, and the aliens were bringing even more ships for the final assault. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president began, "we have 48 hours before the alien fleet reaches Earth orbit. I want to hear from each department about our final preparations." General Patricia Hayes activated the military status display. "All remaining fleet elements are positioned around Earth. We have 237 operational vessels, including every converted civilian ship we could arm. Ground defenses are at maximum readiness. Engineer Kate Sullivan, now serving as the Chief of Emergency Modifications, reported next. We've converted every orbital station, every satellite, every piece of space infrastructure into potential weapons. If something can carry an explosive charge or fire a kinetic round, it's now part of our defense grid. Dr. Ben Parker looked exhausted as he delivered his report. The sonic disruptors are installed on 80% of our ships. We've also developed a planet-based version that should disrupt alien communications across the entire Earth orbital zone, but it's untested on this scale. President Martinez nodded grimly. And civilian evacuation? Impossible, admitted Civil Defense Director Carol Davis. We can't evacuate 8 billion people in 2 days. Most of our population will have to shelter in place and hope we can keep the fighting in space. The reality of their situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Earth would either remain free or humanity would face extinction. There was no middle ground. In factories around the world, the final preparations continued without pause. Tony Martinez's replacement at the Detroit facility, his nephew Carlos Martinez, supervised the loading of the last ammunition shipments onto transport vessels heading for the fleet. Uncle Tony would be proud, Carlos murmured as he watched the final cargo containers being sealed. The elder Martinez had died defending Mars, but his work continued. Every round produced in his factory carried a piece of his determination to remain free. Captain Amy Foster's sister, Diana Foster, had taken command of the remaining civilian convoy vessels. Her cargo haulers were loaded not with trade goods, but with nuclear charges and kinetic penetrators. If the aliens reached Earth's surface, these converted freighters would be the last line of defense. All units, this is Foster, she broadcast to her makeshift squadron. We're not professional soldiers, but we're fighting for our homes. Remember what Amy taught us? When in doubt, ram something. The grim humor in her voice reflected the mood throughout human space. Everyone knew the odds, but no one spoke of. Surrendered Doter Commander Jake Morrison, promoted to Admiral after his success at Mars, coordinated the final fleet positions from the command ship Washington. His force looked impressive on the tactical display, but he knew it was barely half the size of the approaching alien armada. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, we're receiving a transmission from the approaching fleet. The aliens are demanding our surrender. Morrison considered the message for exactly 3 seconds. Reply with the same response Captain Brooks gave them at the beginning, one word, no. The alien fleet arrived at Earth like a storm cloud of death. 637 warships, the largest force the Zephyrian Collective had ever assembled, spread across the outer system in perfect formation. At their head flew the inevitable Conquest war leader Vexenor's flagship. All vessels advance to attack formation, Vexenor commanded. Target their orbital installations first. I want their defensive grid eliminated before we engage their ships. But as the alien fleet approached Earth, they discovered that the humans had prepared one final surprise. The planet itself had become a weapon. Dr. Ben Parker's planet-wide sonic disruptor activated just as the alien fleet entered Earth's orbital zone. The massive array of transmitters, built into communication satellites and space stations around the globe, sent out a coordinated pulse of subsonic frequencies that hit the entire alien fleet simultaneously. The effect was catastrophic for Zephyrian coordination. Across their fleet, communication systems failed, navigation computers crashed, and formation discipline collapsed as individual ship commanders lost contact with their fleet leaders. Now, Admiral Morrison ordered, all units, engage at will. The human fleet attacked from every direction at once. Ships emerged from behind the moon, from the shadow of space stations, from the debris fields of the outer system. They had learned from every previous battle, and now they fought with the desperate skill of a species facing extinction. Captain Ryan Brooks, commanding the battered but still functional Denver, led a squadron of destroyers against the alien flagship. His ship's kinetic weapons hammered against the inevitable Conquest's shields while sonic disruptors scrambled the enemy's response. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Wilson, Lisa Carter's replacement in the interceptor squadrons, piloted her fighter through a maze of alien fire to deliver a nuclear charge directly to an enemy cruiser's reactor. The explosion took out 3 more alien ships in a chain reaction of devastation. Engineer Kate Sullivan's converted orbital stations opened fire with every weapon they could mount. Mining lasers designed to cut through asteroids sliced through alien hulls. Industrial fabricators launched streams of metal debris that peppered enemy ships like deadly hail. But the human defenders were paying a terrible price. Diana Foster's cargo hauler exploded as it rammed an alien destroyer. The Washington took critical damage as it shielded smaller vessels from enemy fire. One by one, Earth's defenders were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. War leader Vexoner, struggling to coordinate his fleet through the chaos of the sonic bombardment, watched in amazement as human ships continued to fight even after taking damage that should have disabled them. Crews stayed at their posts as their vessels broke apart around them. Captains rammed their ships into alien vessels rather than surrender. War leader, his aide reported with barely controlled panic, "We've lost over 200 ships. The humans are fighting like madmen." "No," Vexner replied, finally understanding what they were facing. "They're fighting like humans." The battle raged for 12 hours, longer than any engagement in Zephyrian military history. When Admiral Morrison's surviving ships launched their final coordinated assault, using the last of their nuclear charges and kinetic rounds, they broke the back of the alien fleet's resistance. War leader Vexenor found himself alone on the bridge of his damaged flagship, most of his fleet destroyed or disabled around Earth. His tactical displays showed the impossible. His overwhelming force had been defeated by an enemy that refused to acknowledge defeat. "Communications," he ordered wearily. "Open a channel to the human fleet." Admiral Morrison's face appeared on the screen, his uniform torn and his ship's bridge scarred by battle damage. Behind him, Morrison could see the orbital wreckage of what had been the most powerful fleet in Zephyrian history. "I am War Leader Vexenor of the Zephyrian Collective," the alien commander began. "I wish to discuss terms of withdrawal." Morrison's expression never changed. "There are no terms. Leave our space and never come back." "You do not understand," Vexenor continued. "My forces could regroup. The Collective could send more ships." "Then we'll destroy those too," Morrison replied simply. "And the ones after that, and the ones after that. We will never stop fighting. We will never surrender. We will never submit." For a long moment, Vexenor stared at the human commander. In Morrison's eyes, he saw something that chilled him to his core, absolute determination, backed by a willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom.